Have a whole ton of questions, so that can be our format.
Great. Can you hear me back there? Should I use the? Can you hear me okay? Use the microphone. Use the microphone. Okay, I will use the mic. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Well, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for being here, from here and there, even to friends from far away. Thank you for being here. So lots to talk about, and I want to leave it to whatever you want to talk about. We're obviously in a couple of wars, maybe in others. Gasoline prices are high. It goes on and on and on. What I will tell you, since this is a political activist group, we are about to commit an act of political activism of resistance that is probably the most powerful thing we can do, which is we are going to win the elections in November in a very big way. We're going to take back the House. I want to be a little careful about how we say that, but 3 months ago I would not have said that the Senate is in play, but I think the Senate is in play. That's a result of the president's god-awful numbers. Not hard to see why those numbers are what they are. They are what they are because this is a guy who said, I'm not going to get you into a war in the Middle East, and I'm going to make your prices lower. And the exact opposite has happened. And it turns out that there is accountability to be visited when you do exactly the opposite of what you said you would do when you were running for office. And it's up to, I don't report this with any happiness because it may not be true in a place like New Canaan or Darien, but there's an awful lot of people who are suffering very badly, paying $30 more a week to fill their cars with gasoline, and that's even more true in places in the Midwest where people drive a lot more than they do here. So anyway, that is not a perfect solution. Assuming we have a majority in the House, quite likely I'll wind up as chair of the Intelligence Committee, and I will have individual subpoena power. And when I hear the word subpoena power, I think Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel and others, people who desperately deserve a little bit of oversight. Raskin will be judiciary. Anyway, you can sort of start to see that we will, for the first time in 2 years, undertake some very serious oversight of an out-of-control administration. I don't see conditions changing rapidly in a way that is going to reverse the trend that is so toxic for Trump and for MAGA and for the Republicans. Even if he somehow manages to reopen the Strait of Hormuz in the next couple of weeks, that is not something that gets fixed quickly. There are, sadly, months and months of high food prices. Because remember, fertilizer, helium, all sorts of other stuff moves through the Strait of Hormuz, and it's not moving right now. It's been a very discouraging time, particularly doing what I do. I have oversight over the intelligence agencies, which, as you might imagine, are being as aggressive as we see the military being. It's just that we don't talk about it because what they do is done in secret. And so, I've had to watch very closely as we have attacked boat after boat carrying cocaine out of Venezuela. And you know who drives these boats. And yes, they are people who have made bad decisions to get involved in narco trafficking, but these are local fishermen who are taking or used to take $500 to run a fast boat into an island, and now the entire might of the United States Armed Forces is killing to the tune of whatever 350 or so that we have killed to date. And so anyway, it's a profoundly difficult moment from a moral and an ethical standpoint, but I start to see the dawn on the horizon. And so. And I'll maybe close with this at the end of our hour together. But the work now is the work of building a larger majority. In a democracy, you add people, you don't subtract people. So we need to find ways to appeal to those folks who are disenchanted with the guy they voted for last time. And we don't need to get much of MAGA. We just need to convince a number of people to be with us so that we can take the House, so that we can take the Senate, and so that 2 years from now we win the White House and we're in a position to actually make policy changes that will show the American people what we can do. And candidly, we need to do it better than we did under Biden, right? We need to actually address the fact that people cannot afford to rent or to rent an apartment or buy a home. We actually need to take steps to reduce the costs of health care. Now, if we talk about it the way we did in the Biden administration and say, we passed the biggest down payment on climate change, and we don't build a single damn charging station in Connecticut, as we did not do, we will be in this pendulum where people say, we gave you a chance and you didn't follow through. So I happen to believe that the two keys to an enduring majority, which is really important to a lot of Americans, are building out a larger majority. And that's going to involve some compromise. Your neighbor who loves to hunt and has a few guns in his house, if that neighbor cares about the American working class, if he cares about middle class people, if he cares about affordability, if he cares about a decent country, welcome. We want you in our coalition because we need a majority. We need an enduring majority. And we're going to have to actually make this stuff happen. I'm already thinking about what happens beyond 28, because I've seen too many of these swings. 2010 under Barack Obama, this amazing moment in 2008 and 2010, the pendulum swings hard back and we can't accomplish much of what we wanted to. But anyway, I'll talk more about that, but I don't want to talk for too long now because I want to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about.
Okay. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So, the first question, let's get it out of the way. There's a couple on FISA, so, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Firstly, are you comfortable moving forward with this, given that, given the ongoing rights abuses by U.S. agencies underneath this particular administration? And secondly, is it your position that the external threats prevented by FISA outweigh the internal threats of allowing FISA to continue with the Trump administration?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Let me see if I can be a little crisp about this if you want elaboration. To that last question, does the information that we get as a result of FISA 702, is that more important than the potential for abuse of the program? The question to that is 100%, 1,000% yes. As ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, every single week I see what this authority allows us to do in terms of stopping terrorist attacks, many of which have been declassified. There was to be an ISIS attack on a European Taylor Swift concert last summer, which was stopped because of FISA 702. The recovery of the hostages, in the assistance that we gave in the recovery of the hostages in Gaza, and I could go on and on and on. The fact that we listen in on cartel leaders who are planning operations, kidnapping, extortion in the United States. This stuff cannot be, and by the way, nobody argues this. This cannot go away. To give you one more example, the presidential daily brief, the president doesn't read the presidential daily brief, setting that aside, it's our most important intelligence product. Roughly 60% of that comes from FISA 702. So fact one, it cannot be allowed to expire. Fact two, it is a legitimately controversial program. Why? Because the way the program works, and it's been reauthorized time and time again, the way the program works, 300,000 happens to be the number now, of people who we believe are either terrorist suspects, spies, cyber hackers, or drug cartel members. There's about 300,000 of them. What we do is we go to Google, Microsoft, Verizon, the people who run email and text, and we say, give us the emails and texts of these 300,000 people, all of whom are foreigners and abroad. Nobody is on U.S. soil, because when you're on U.S. soil, you have constitutional rights. The reason it's controversial is because some of those people communicate with Americans. So just to make up an example, a Pakistani terrorist suspect might text his cousin in Brooklyn. Now all of a sudden the NSA has U.S. person information in their database. Not good, in the sense that the intelligence community should not have U.S. person information in their databases. So what do? Over many years we have tried to put on protections to make sure that fact is not abused. And 2 years ago, with the support of 70% of Democrats under the Biden administration, we reauthorized this program with a series of 50 safeguards that took the number, what I was just talking about is a U.S. person query, where they say, tell me about Jim Himes in the database, took that number from 120,000 to about 7,000. So it took the number way down, and it took their compliance up to about 99%. Now, if you're Jamie Raskin, who I am negotiating a package of safeguards with right now, and Jamie Raskin is standing right here, he says, yes, but how can you trust the FBI and the Department of Justice to give you good numbers? And that's a good question, because we don't. It is a felony to mislead the Congress, and it is professional lawyers inside the Department of Justice who are preparing this stuff, who know that they will go to jail if they do what maybe Cash asked them to and falsify the numbers. Those numbers are then reported to the DOJ, which I don't care about because I don't trust the DOJ. They're reported to the federal judges, who I do care about because the federal judges time and time again have stood for the law against this administration. And they're reported to my committee and to the Judiciary Committee. So to make a very long story short, in the last 15 months of this administration, there has not been one incident of Kash Patel saying, run a query on Jim Himes, which would have been a deeply disturbing thing because I'm in the political opposition. And therefore, while I will agree with Jamie Raskin 100% that this thing could be abused by people who abuse everything, I lean into the notion that we can't let it expire. And last thing I'm going to say, Jamie and I have been negotiating a package of safeguards that if you're interested, I'll get into, that I think they might invite us in. To date, it's been a pure Republican thing. And I think that since we extended it for 45 days, I think that they may invite us in and say, let's do a bipartisan, bicameral renewal of the program with the package of safeguards. That's where I hope we can land.
Okay. Next. How can the Iran conflict be controlled by Congress?
Well, so let me just be blunt. It can't. This president has no regard for the Constitution or for the constitutional fact that we have to authorize military activities, and he has no regard for the fact that the War Powers Act says very clearly that after 60 days, hostilities have to cease unless there has been an authorization by Congress. We may pass a War Powers Act. I put my name, I've sponsored now 3 of them. We may pass one because Republicans are starting to feel the pressure of this war, gas prices, food prices, etc., and they're starting to say that they'll vote for us. Most notably, Susan Collins of Maine said that she would join the Democrats on a War Powers resolution because she feels the harsh breath of accountability on her neck.
She's very concerned. She's concerned.
She's firing off anxious letters. Even if the Congress passes a War Powers resolution, the president will ignore it. So what is going to end this war is and I alluded to this before, is the fact that the president's numbers are catastrophic. The president's numbers are lower than George W. Bush's numbers were at the worst moment of the Iraq War. The president's numbers are lower than they were at the worst moments for LBJ in the Vietnam War. And my Republican colleagues and the president are starting to realize that this war is going to end them. And as a result, and this is a whole other topic that we shouldn't celebrate, but as a result, he is going to take an awful deal with the Iranians. He's going to declare victory, sail away, and the strait will reopen, but he's going to take an awful deal to do that. But anyway, to be very blunt, this is not a guy who's going to listen to or act based on what Congress does.
Do you believe that Democrats in Congress have been successful at blocking Project 2025 or portions of Project 2025?
Remember where I work in the House of Representatives, the minority has no power, none. That's not true in the Senate. In the Senate, of course, you need 60 votes to advance something. And we should count it as something of a victory, because I actually thought that they were going to do away with the filibuster, that they were going to cave to Donald Trump and do away with the filibuster. Now it was going to be a majority rule thing. They haven't done that. Some credit, I guess, goes to some Republican senators. I guess I would say this. The one piece of legislation that they have gotten done, they got done without any Democratic help. This was the one big, beautiful, stupid bill that they passed that basically gutted Medicaid and extended very generous tax cuts for corporations and very wealthy Americans. They did that without any Democratic support, and they did it using a procedure called reconciliation, which allows them to bypass the filibuster. Apart from that, they have done almost nothing legislatively. They are not going to pass the SAVE Act, which is a hideous piece of stupidity. And that's the one thing they've managed to do. But the real answer to your question is that, and by the way, we grapple with this. We have to grapple with this. The American people 2 years ago said, guess what, Democrats? Yeah, I know Donald Trump tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power and that he's a con man and a felon, but we'd rather have him in the presidency than you guys. And we'd rather have his people in the Congress than you guys. Right. And if you're a Democrat and you're not thinking about why that is, you got to find a different business to be in. And there's a lot of theories about that we can talk about. But anyway, the answer to your question is the judiciary has stopped or tried to stop just about everything that he has done. And they have been largely but not totally successful. So whether it was, I could go on and on and on about the executive orders the judiciary has laughed out of court. The problem is the judiciary moves slowly. So when the president says we're going to close down USAID, the courts say no, but the courts say that 2 months later when USAID has already handed pay slips to people.
What success, if any, have you had in engaging Republican colleagues in Congress about issues like the war with Iran, gas prices, affordability issues? Are any of them open to working with Democrats? You did say they're thinking about it, but is it only because they're going to lose an election? Do they not think this is wrong?
It's mainly, and it's recent, it's mainly that they have come to realize that they're going to lose. And so you see guys like Mike Lawler, whose district starts just 9 miles up the road here in New York, showing a little bit of independence, because they realize that the numbers are so bad that they're going to lose, unless they can say, I voted against the president. Now, when a Republican does that, that's another way of getting obliterated, because Trump will light him up on True Social. But let me say this, because I haven't had a lot of optimistic stuff to say. We're actually going to get a housing bill done in the Congress. Connecticut got a good bill done after stumbling a little bit. We're going to get a good federal housing bill done that is going to be strongly bipartisan. This bill passed out of the Senate 89-10, actually, to show you how bipartisan that was. We'll get it done in the House. So we're going to pass a housing bill that is going to make it a lot easier for us to build the 3 to 5 million housing units that mean that my 2 daughters in their mid-20s may someday be able to own a home, or at least pay a reasonable rent on their apartments. So it's not like there's nothing. It just tends to be stuff like housing that doesn't fall into the maw of the very polarized politics that we have right now.
There were quite a few questions about the Democratic Party. The first one, how is the party dealing with the divisions within it? There is clearly a left-leaning, vocal younger group and a more senior, moderate group that is less vocal. Given the situation in the country, we need a strong, united, and forceful party. How can we reconcile these various wings?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me answer it in 2 ways. In November, we've got House and Senate elections. And that's the easy one. I want Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, who probably doesn't have a ton of friends in this room, to say exactly what she needs to say to get reelected in rural Washington State. And I'm delighted that Zohran Mamdani can get elected in New York City. But those are radically different geographies that will be subject to different winning messages. Connecticut, where the land is steady habits, right? Fairfield County, 100 years of Republican representation. Today it's a blue place. So I try to sort of reflect the general sentiment of the people of Fairfield County, which is my congressional district. I don't want to get into leadership stuff. We have way too many senior level in the House, in the Senate, way too many senior level Democrats who are simply, they're probably very good people, but they are simply out of touch with the way Americans communicate today, because they're in their 70s and their 80s. Last thing I want to say, okay, so that's 26. 26? Yeah, 26. 28 is different, because we're going to run a president. And here's what I think is true, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, because as much as I love beating up on fellow Democrats or arguing about Trump, I cannot stop thinking about the fact that the American people said, no, we don't want you guys. I cannot stop thinking about the fact that the Democratic brand today is worse than Donald Trump's brand. I think the answer to that is, and I'll defend this. I'll defend this not just here, but I'll defend this, around the world. The answer is the party leans left economically. So what used to be a radical idea 20 years ago, Medicare for all, that's not a radical idea anymore. Now, if you ask me, Americans don't like to be told what to do, so if you want me to sign up for Medicare for all, I want it to be, but if you have insurance, you get to keep it and you like it, right? Because you tell Americans, like, we're changing everything for you because we know better, we're going to end up where we are today. So my point is that something like Medicare for all, which 20 years ago was considered too lefty, today is very much in the mainstream. So I think the winning thing for a presidential campaign is lean left economically, be totally focused on how to cut the cost of housing, of food and energy, and in particular healthcare, because we control a lot on healthcare, and be careful on the cultural and social issues.
But how are you going to bring in that big tent then? I'm sorry, Congressman, I don't see that.
That's the big
I don't
tent.
mean to interrupt you, but you said you have to act. I'm sorry, but this is one of my pet peeves. I'm sorry. You want a bigger tent, right? You want to convince those sort of middle of the road, semi-conservative Republican, perhaps, right, independents to vote. How are you going to do that with that kind of platform?
I am 100% convinced that 60% of Americans believe in left-leaning economic policy, including a lot of unaffiliated, right? And I am convinced that 60% of Americans think we're exotic on cultural issues. And this is going to land hard on some ears in this room. But there is a reason why Donald Trump spent $240 million in the final week of the campaign saying one simple sentence: she's for they, them, he's for you. There are issues where we are out of sync. And this is not a statement of who's right or who's wrong. This is a statement of where we're a little out of sync. We are out of sync with the American public on issues like trans participation in sports, elite sports. And again, I'm not making a value judgment here. These are really hard issues.
But if you say that when there are existential crises like we are in and approaching, where we are losing the rule of law, where we are losing our respect around the world, that those type of issues are down at the bottom of the list. And it is the person who will show leadership and say we need to not only restore America, but make it better, and stop worrying about the be, them, and all that sort of thing. And what is the point of it? It is a credible issue, but what Democrats have to do is address the crises that's coming, that's here, and it's only going to get worse under this president and this Republican Party that is the majority now. And so you can't keep litigating the last election. You have to go to the next one. And that's, I think, how Democrats have to act. That 2024 is over. Forget about all of that stuff that Trump went on. We know that he, through social media and right-wing media and the manosphere and all that sort of thing, he brainwashed people to believing things that weren't true. Like he's a crazy businessman and that he will be best for the economy, and somehow people totally forgot that 2020 existed and COVID and what he did. And that was a crisis that we all saw, and his terrible leadership during it.
Let me be super quick in the answer. I can say just a couple sentences. Number one, I am convinced that the answer is left-leaning economics and being careful and right, maybe even slightly right. However, don't ask me as a Democrat to stop talking about racial justice or standing up for trans kids. The thing we can do, look, I think most Americans are decent people. And so long as you approach them with the thing that they care about most, which is my kid can't afford to live within an hour of where she's teaching, if you start with that, then I think you can say, oh, and by the way, the corruption and the hideous violence against migrants. You just have to start with the thing that they care about most.
Pocketbook issues.
That's the pocketbook issue. And by the way, the only word you said, which I think is dangerous, and the only word I disagree with is, don't ever believe that Donald Trump brainwashed people.
Yeah.
That is
correct.
That is denigrating a decision that the electorate made. And if you're in my business, you've got to respect the decision. Now, I don't disagree with you. You lied to it, but the reason they hate Democrats is because they think we look down on them. Right. I don't spend a lot of time in North Carolina and Ohio, but I spend enough time in
how do you explain January 6th? How do you explain that, to say that he doesn't brainwash people? Because that's
so
his
I think that we could debate this for the next hour. But we can move on. Okay. All right. So the next question is, I'm confident we can have fair midterm elections in Connecticut, but after last week's SCOTUS decision, what are the most important and effective steps Democrats can take to ensure fair elections in other states?
Yeah. So there's a quick answer to that, which is that we can pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which we did in the House, whatever it was, 3 years ago. That's the easy answer to that, and if we have the House and the Senate, we will do that. There's a much more urgent project, which is making sure that these elections upcoming are secure. I was actually just up in New Haven with Rosa DeLauro and Joe Morelli, sort of rallying the troops to that. That is going to be a combination of making sure that people like Mark Elias and Norm Eisen and his gang deploy lots of lawyers, around, in particular places like Georgia and Michigan, where there are contestable Senate races. I think we're going to be okay here in Fairfield County. Most importantly, we need to win with a margin that makes it uncontestable. We need to win big. If things are really narrow, we're going to get into that gray zone of January 6th.
Yeah.
Last guy out of the chamber here, or second to last guy anyway. Believe me, I take a backseat to no one on appreciating the hideousness that could ensue if they really mobilize. But we've got to get lawyers out there. We've got to be out at polling places bearing witness, with our phones, making sure we're documenting what is happening. We got to make sure that people actually turn out and vote. And then it's up to us, quite frankly, as Democrats, and I'm pestering endlessly the DNC and folks to come up with a package that we can just give to activist groups with other things that can be done. Who should receive donations? Is it Democracy Now, Democracy Forward? There's all these groups. How are we really going to come together to protect these upcoming elections?
Which actually brings us to another question, which is where is the DNC?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of criticism recently under Martin's leadership that they seem to be very quiet. They're not fundraising the way they should.
Where's the message?
There isn't a message, a coherent message. Perhaps that's not
That's
relevant.
why fundraising is so bad. Okay, if there's no message, no platform, you're not going to get the money.
So, look, I'm just going to be very frank. The DNC is nowhere. Not only is the DNC not making anything, and by the way, I'm not even sure what again, the message.
Okay.
Here the message is made, and I'm going to win this seat in November pretty big, and Marie Gluesenkamp-Harris is going to win in a red district. And anyway, my point is that the message right now is up to the 218 or 216 members who are running in the centers. Ossoff is going to have his message. I don't know if it's going to be Haley or McMorrow or whoever, but the point is that there's not one message right now. There has to be in 2028. But the DNC is nowhere. Right now, they're on my shit list because I cannot think of a stupider way of approaching. You've heard me now twice say with some passion, we got to look back on how we screwed that up. And maybe there's some brainwashing going on, but we screwed that up, right? And the idea that the DNC won't release the autopsy on how we screwed it up, Ken Martin should go, full stop. I've got to get over this FISA thing, but when I'm done with FISA, I'm going to be at the front door of the DNC say, if you can't release that autopsy to tell us what we did wrong, what do they say? What's the first step in a 12-step program? Admit that you have a problem. Show us what the problems were.
Yeah, I'll tell you what it is. That there's good evidence that liberal policies are supported by a broad segment of the population, including Republicans. And the messaging from the DNC, they've been doing it wrong because they always try to water down the policies, which pisses off the liberals. And it makes the other people think like, you have no guts. You don't stand up for what you believe in. And the way to do it is have the policies that people agree on, but back down instead of having this social justice, ultra-liberal messaging go to the middle. The other thing I think we need is a liberal version of patriotism. It used to be you could get ahead in the United States. You can't now. You used to be able to own a home. You can't now. Restore the American dream. Restore American leadership. That should be it should be liberal patriotism, and we should make that point. The other thing is the DNC should be saying corruption, 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 corruption every day.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I agree with all that. By the way, don't look to the DNC. I don't know what I've been in Democratic politics for 2 decades. I have no idea what the DNC does, honestly. They certainly don't do anything for me. So don't worry about the DNC. Worry about getting the majority. Worry about winning the Senate. And then when we have a presidential candidate, that candidate's got to be articulating the message that it sounds like we're kind of agreeing on here.
Yeah, I think so. Is there a think tank crafting a Project 2029 for Democrats? We need a plan to implement immediately if we win back the House, Senate, and White House. If we return to power, our policies should focus on making life more affordable. This includes everything from housing to healthcare, etc. If we achieve real wins in affordability, we could stay in power for decades.
Yeah, is there a think tank? No, right now there's not a think tank. There are a lot of people in Congress, and there's a lot of presidential candidates thinking a lot about what that message has to be. I'll give you my version of it, and it is a version that is 60-70% shared across the party. My version is a couple of things. Housing. We're going to figure out a way to build 5 million units in this country, and that's going to be, remember, the federal government doesn't have a ton of levers on housing, but we're going to figure out a way to build 5 million units in this country. Healthcare, we're going to finally figure out a way, and I cut my teeth on the Affordable Care Act in 2009, to overhaul this catastrophe of an inefficient and terribly producing terrible results healthcare system. And then third, and I'm going to throw this one in because I think it's really important, really focusing on childcare. The lack of affordable childcare takes a third of our potential workforce, probably that's a little bit of an exaggeration, out of contention from the workforce. And it tends to be mothers, not exclusively, but a mother who needs to take 6 years off to raise children or 12 years off to raise children is an individual who has a really hard time getting back on the train, especially in the era of AI and technology. So that's my little preview. And if AOC, who's a different kind of Democrat than I am, or Marie Gluskin-Paris, I think you would hear some version of those three things from all of us.
You said that at a previous town hall that a lesson the Democrats need to learn after 2024 is that government needs to actually get things done. So we can pass all these laws or all these bills, but then you hit all these barriers at the state level and at the local level. An example this person used was charging stations in Connecticut, that there was funding and none got built. What is that just a local issue? Can the federal government override any of that?
It can't be a local issue. It's an existential issue for the left and the Democratic Party, right? If you're the party that says that government can deliver good things to you and you persistently don't do it, they will throw you to the curb. That's part of the reason that they threw us to the curb in 24. I campaigned in 24 on, we just passed the biggest investment in climate change ever. And you know how many charging stations we built in the state of Connecticut in 4 years? 3 years. Zero. I campaigned in 2024 on, we just passed the biggest investment in infrastructure since the Eisenhower administration. I still have a damn bridge. Well, I've got a bridge in Bridgeport that I've been working on for 25 years. Not 25 years, is an exaggeration. For 17 years. And I've got 2 bridges on the Greenwich, New York border there that are dangerous. These are 50s era bridges that get trees and stuff in it when the Byron Rivers floods and the water backs up and there's a whole neighborhood that gets flooded and stuff. And it's going to take 6 years to build these bridges. So it's existential for the party that says we can make your life better when we take credit for the biggest investment in infrastructure ever, and we don't actually build a bridge. So I'm spending a lot of time in the back nine of my political career lighting fires on people and say we've got to actually start delivering, and we can do it. I'll give you one example: healthcare. For the first time in 3 generations, well, actually, it's the first time since Medicare existed, we passed a law to make the top 10 most used drugs in this country negotiated by Medicare against the pharmaceutical companies. That was a wonderful thing, and it's something I say when people say, well, how are you actually going to fix the healthcare system? The problem is, that phased in over a period of 5 years. That's 2.5 terms for a member of Congress. So I'll keep saying that, because if people like me keep saying we did all this stuff for you and people don't actually see their lives improving, they're going to choose Donald Trump.
After speaking with Putin for 90 minutes last week, Trump pulled 5,000 troops out of Germany. This was per Heather Kostrich. This has alarmed, from what I've read, even Republicans. What do you believe is Putin's influence on Trump? Tell the truth.
I don't believe. I'm going to set aside what I'm going to call conspiracy theories. No, I don't believe there's a P-tape. No, I don't believe he's a paid agent. I don't believe that. There doesn't need to be that stuff. And I hate answering questions that are premised on what's happening inside Donald Trump's brain, because I have never met the man and I plan never to meet the man. What I can observe for you is that he is a 6-year-old boy who has adulation for apparently powerful figures. It's not a coincidence that that Xi, who he's going to go see in 2 weeks, and he's going to give away high-end chips to Xi or Putin, who has unconstrained power, or even, this guy doesn't have unconstrained power, but he certainly looks like it, the King of England. Trump just, he just has adulation for power, and that overrides everything. And so I think that's the dynamic that explains it. Good news for those of you who care about NATO, which I think is everybody. And this is an example of Democrats and Republicans working together. When we passed the National Defense Authorization Act last year, Republicans joined us in setting minimum troop levels for NATO in Europe. So we're at 90,000 troops there right now, which, by the way, is a spike over historical levels. Under the law, he can't take that number below 80,000. So he can drop 5,000 just at his own decision. But it's an example of Democrats and Republicans working together for something that we traditionally used to agree on.
So the Republicans understand the value of NATO, at least enough of them.
Where I work, and I tell Europeans this every day, 90 to 95% of the Congress is traditional in the sense that we're standing with Ukraine and we're standing with NATO. The president is not there, and he's his own branch of government. My Republican colleagues are terrified of the president, and so they're very quiet and very careful about how they say that. But the fringe, the fringe is really very small. It says stop helping Ukraine, they're corrupt, whatever it is that they're saying. It's really a small part of the Congress.
What races should we be focusing on to try to flip beside Lawler in New York?
Beside Lawler's the closest one. There is a magnificent firefighter by the name of Bob Brooks, who's running in Pennsylvania 7. That's a 2-hour drive from here. It's Allentown. It's just on the other side of New Jersey. We don't have any firefighters in the Democratic caucus. I'm so excited to have some firefighters. And I'm saying that not just because of Bob Brooks, but because one of the ways we're going to start getting back with blue-collar, unionized Americans is to actually have them inside the caucus and contributing to the conversation. Because when you have these coastal Connecticut guys, that's important, I think. But if you really want to win in places like Allentown and Ohio and Michigan, which we do, you better have some of those folks in the caucus. So Bob Brooks in Pennsylvania 7. If you want to drive up to New Hampshire, there is a contested Senate race up there. Glenn Pappas, I don't know if he's cleared the field for a Senate run. And then we have a very contentious race in Maine, too. That's a little bit more of a hike, but Jared Golden, who probably doesn't have a ton of fans in this room, is retiring, and that's a seat that we could easily lose. Rural Maine is a whole different universe. So there's a couple of places within driving distance where you can really make a difference.
Okay. Considering recent lawsuits against Meta and other platforms where the jury found them liable for allowing predators and misogynists to target girls, would you support a social media ban on users under 17?
The only hesitation you hear in my voice right now is that a lot of this has been implemented at the municipal and the state level. Everything I read about, and as I mentioned earlier, I raised 2 teenagers that are now in their mid-20s, suggests that some version of that is a really good idea. All over America, they're banning phones in schools, and apparently the results are spectacular. We all see it with our kids or our brothers and sisters, the devastation that this is causing, particularly to teenage kids. So it's never really been contemplated at the federal level, but I would certainly entertain it as an idea.
And then,
you know what we need to do? Sorry, I'm going to go off topic here because this is so
Yes.
important. And it's going to be a focus of mine when I get through this FISA 702 thing, however that happens. The conversation about FISA 702 and the conversation about the government purchasing commercially available information and the conversation about what OpenAI owes the New York Times for training their models, none of those conversations make any sense until we finally pass a federal data privacy law. We've been mucking around for years now. Europe's done it with this thing GDPR. California did it with this thing called CCPA. We have got to pass a federal data privacy law which says you control your data. If you want to give it to Mark Zuckerberg so that you get Facebook for free, that's fine. But that's the first step, and that doesn't have to do with social media bans.
No.
But that's the first step in dealing with so many of these other hard issues.
And how do your Republican colleagues feel about that?
It's not a partisan thing. It's we were close. We were close, and I love me some Nancy Pelosi, but she was representing California, and California had its own privacy law, and she didn't want to push a federal one that could have. So there were some funky politics that were not about Democratic. There's actually a lot of bipartisan interest in this.
Should we do it in Connecticut?
Was that?
Should we do it in Connecticut? Should we pass a ban in Connecticut?
Again, I try not to step on state legislators' toes or municipal legislators' toes, but if the towns that I lived in said that there will not be social media in schools, I would cheer.
We're trying.
What are your feelings about federal oversight of AI?
Let's start with this. I don't trust any of these guys. I don't trust Sam Altman. I don't trust Zuckerberg. I certainly don't trust Elon Musk. I will tell you, because I had the opportunity to meet him and talk to him for an hour about 10 days ago, I actually have some trust for Dario Amodei, who runs Anthropic. He's actually being the good guy here. I don't know if that matters to you or not. Here's the reason why that's a really hard question. AI, there's probably 20 things that could go horribly wrong with AI. AI could train a new PhD biochemist to build a virus that would be far more lethal than COVID, and you could do that with CRISPR technology. AI could be racially biased in credit decisions that Washington Mutual is doing because it gets the training data is biased. AI, there's even this sort of almost sci-fi thing of it's going to decide that it doesn't need us around anymore. So my point is that there's question after question about AI where we need to deal with them individually. How are we going to make sure that banks are not making credit decisions based on AI algorithms that are racially biased? How are we going to make sure that we know that all of these guys with the frontier models are testing them and testing them and testing them? So it won't answer the question of how can I make an IED. And so, again, it's a hard question to answer simply because there's all these different verticals where, and by the way, I'd like to believe I'm at least in the top quartile of understanding of technology. This is the Congress of the United States you're talking about. I mean, it was 5 years ago that somebody was referring to the internet as the intertubes and stuff. So we've got some work to do.
There is continued violence on the West Bank, even though there is a ceasefire. What do you think we should be doing about that? How do you feel about that?
Continuing violence on the West Bank, which is hideous,
Yeah.
Absolutely hideous. If you look at and see what's happening, Gaza has, thank God, is not nearly as violent a place as it was 2 years ago, but the violence there was hideous. And I should say this first, and the violence on October 7th perpetrated against Israel was hideous, and of course what's happening in Lebanon. You saw a vote in the Senate, which was pretty remarkable. 47 Democrats in the Senate, 40 of them voted for restricting aid to Israel, not to stop it, but to say, no, we're not going to send 2,000-pound bombs, no, we're not going to send military bulldozers that can be used to bulldoze entire Lebanese villages. So you are starting to see the emergence of people, and I would count myself in this category, of people who have always supported Israel, but who look at Israel's behavior in the last couple of years and say, it cannot be a blank check without the Leahy laws and other things that will ultimately control the worst excesses of the Netanyahu government. The real answer, if you ask Jim Himes, and this you shouldn't ask Jim Himes because it's not his purview. I fear that this situation is going to be really ugly unless and until the Israeli people decide they're going to have a new leader in October when they go to elections. Right. I think that as long as you've got Netanyahu pandering to people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, it's just whatever we do or say is not going to matter. So my hope is, and I don't know Israeli politics, but my sense is that the Prime Minister is really unpopular. My sense is that making real progress in that country, in that region, is going to depend on a change of leadership in Israel.
You took nearly $100,000 from AIPAC last cycle. Will you commit to not taking more money from AIPAC next cycle?
So I have stopped meeting with there are a variety of, there's J Street, there's AIPAC, there's a variety of pro-Israel groups, and they fight with each other, J Street on AIPAC, AIPAC on J Street, so I've just stopped taking meetings with any of them. I'm on the Intelligence Committee, so I can make up my own mind, and I have not asked for or accepted any fundraisers. The way AIPAC used to work, well, I think they still work this way, is that they would get a bunch of people together and do a fundraiser for you, and I haven't done that in years because I don't. If you believe that I'm going to be influenced by $100,000, house races cost $3-4 million. If you believe that I'm going to be influenced by $100,000, you don't know me very well, but nonetheless, I have not reached out or sought that kind of support anytime in the last couple of years.
Well, Trump signed the affordable housing bill, and if not, how do we message that to the public?
Yeah, I think he will. I think he will. I think we're going to get this done in the next. I was talking about it earlier. I think we're going to get it done in the next couple of weeks, and I think he is going to be so desperate for some legislative achievement, he won't even care what's in it. I guess that's funny, but I think it's true.
It's sad, but it's true.
I do think he'll sign. It's a good bill. It's a good bill. There's still some rough edges on it, but it's a good bill. It's going to make a difference.
Okay. And then this actually takes us back to whether we can and will win the House or the Senate. Now that SCOTUS has gutted the Voting Rights Act, do you still feel as confident that we will win the House and have a shot at the Senate? Senate maybe is not as much in play because of that as the House districts, which are the ones that can gerrymander.
Yeah, not at all. The Voting Rights Act doesn't really affect the
Doesn't
Senate
affect the
much
Senate.
because they're statewide elections. I think as a practical matter, Louisiana may redraw their lines, and they may cause us to lose a seat, maybe two. But this, talk about a remarkable piece of idiocy. When Donald Trump told Texas to redraw their lines and started this war, I've been touting, my entire political career, I've been touting nonpartisan drawing of the lines, because I just think it's really good not to have deep red and deep blue districts in the House. But then we responded with California, and at the end of all of this redistricting, they are going to net zero. So all of this insanity, Virginia, California, Indiana didn't do it, and so Trump tonight is actually trying to take out 6 Republicans in Indiana. At the end of this whole crazy thing, they're going to net pretty much zero. They might pick up 1 or 2 in Louisiana. What we worry about is behind that, because behind this election, Mississippi, Alabama, all of those southern states that were subject to pre-approval under the Voting Rights Act may seek very deliberately to dilute the African American districts. St. Louis, Missouri is a district that is represented by Emmanuel Cleaver, and the district is an urban district with majority African American population. They'll carve that like a pie. Now, do we have tools? We do. Maryland. The Maryland legislature chose not to go after 2 seats that they go after Maryland. So we'll get back into this war, but we'll have tools. There will be states like New York and Maryland where if they take 3 seats away, we'll try to regain them. I don't want to go there because this is just not healthy for our democracy, but we do have some tools. The net result, though, candidly, which is a terrible result, is that you will reduce African American representation in the House of Representatives, which is a terrible result.
So that is it for our pre-submitted questions. So
Let her rip.
I wanted to know a number of European countries were able to reduce for like a temporary time the taxes on gasoline and diesel and energy, and I'm wondering why the Democratic Party why couldn't they do something like this for Americans for right now? This is no longer a 60-day thing, and if Europe can do it, why can't we do it for our people?
So gas taxes, there's a federal gasoline tax, the excise tax. I think, depending on the state, I think most of the taxes are state taxes. But it's an interesting idea. I actually hadn't thought about it. I guess it could provide some relief. I feel like the federal gas tax is 18 cents a gallon. I maybe don't somebody can look it up on Google, but I think that in places like California and Connecticut and New Jersey, the big chunk of taxes are state taxes. But thank you for raising that.
I think it would be a statement to the American people.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're all getting really screwed up.
Yeah.
And it wasn't our doing.
Yeah, thanks. I'll do a little work on that. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. We talked about an idea that I loved, and it was never going to get passed. But gasoline prices go up and down $1 naturally over time, right? Like, why not, when gasoline prices have dropped 40 cents a gallon, why not keep 5 of those cents in an increased gas tax and then give it away when the prices go up? I always thought there was kind of a cool way where you might actually create more revenue, but it would be not painful because you would only do it when gas prices went down. But I'll look into your idea. I appreciate that.
Just one more added thing on this. This is going to get really bad because I I just had to buy heating oil because my contract with gallons ran out. I paid $5.34 a gallon. I got 130 gallons for about $4 under $700.
Yeah.
This is pretty serious.
Yep, yep,
And the gasoline companies are not suffering.
yep, yep.
You want to take folks on with that?
Yeah.
Speaking of what you said earlier about the AI companies that are kind of untrustworthy, I think most people in this room would agree that Palantir is one of the most dangerous ones, and untrustworthy ones out of that whole group. So I've seen that you have received campaign funds from Palantir in the past. So have you received them for this cycle, and are you committed to not receiving them in the future?
Yeah. I don't know if you read the protest I went to in Westport. There are a lot of young people that protested in Westport, and I didn't have the facts. You took money from Palantir. I did, I guess in the last year, get $3,500 from Palantir. It turns out to be the number. This is not the issue. I promise you. Again, I have $2 million in my campaign account. If you think that Palantir is buying me for $3,500, and the reason I'm not telling you absolutely yes is because tomorrow somebody's going to say that about this company and that company, and it's just not a thing. By the way, you know what is a thing? What is a thing is taking money out of politics, so I don't have to keep having these conversations.
Yeah. Yes.
The premise of these conversations, and look, you will all have different opinions of me, but the premise of these conversations is that I make decisions based on who gives me money, and I don't. I helped write Dodd-Frank. You think J.P. Morgan and Citibank or my former employer liked Dodd-Frank? Not one bit. Not one bit. So I don't blame you for asking the question, but the real answer is, please, God, let's find ways to get money out of the system. Disclosure, federal, like we have here in Connecticut, public financing and stuff, because apart from being a massive waste of time, it causes people to say, you only made that decision because you got $3,500 from Palantir. I promise you, I didn't even know I got $3,500 from Palantir. It sure as hell didn't influence my decision on Palantir.
Would you want to receive more in the years to come, or would you refuse?
I don't want to. I don't want to receive any money in the years to come.
Well, wouldn't refusing that help with what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. I mean, honestly, if you're going to say that we're going to have a whole list of companies that you will not accept money from, I'm going to think about it a little bit, right? I mean, historically, I've not taken money from oil and gas companies or from gun companies, and that's a decision I made. I could make that decision on Palantir or on APAC. I would just want to think about it a little bit. You know, the other thing is, and I hate to say this, but I will be at the front of the line for any money out of politics, constitutional amendments, legislation, or whatever, but I'm also not unilaterally disarming. You think Republicans are going to stop taking money from the oil and gas companies and from Northrop Grumman? No, they are not. So, again, I know you want a more satisfying answer than I'm going to give you right now, but yeah.
Carrie, you have a question?
One of the many things the regime destroys that will be the least possible to undo once it has been done is the dismantling of our National Forest Service and the resulting rape and pillaging of our forests and public lands. Amid the hundreds of other emergencies that need to be addressed, can Democrats focus some energy on preventing this destruction?
The boundary waters.
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes. You know, to do that, we're going to need to win because you've seen what's happened in the last 2 years. And it's really something when it takes the King of England to come and scold Republicans in Congress that you ought to care about conservation, but apparently
But
that's,
he did it
that's
so
what
well.
He did it so well.
That's why he's the king in some ways. No, but
Yeah.
he did a very good job.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's not much, you know, I care, if I could look it up, I think I have a 100% voting record. The League of Conservation Voters, I care profoundly about this stuff, especially even though I don't live in an area where the Fish and Wildlife Service has a lot of jurisdiction. Here in this suburban area, our environment is so fragile and so important that I do think about it in those terms, yeah.
Chief. Hello, Congressman. I'm Jeannie Calabrese. We spoke briefly yesterday. It's nice to see you. So two things. You were talking about child care and then the electric charges and why isn't that taking off. I think a lot of it is we need behavioral and cultural change here in America. I think in France, I mean, my son's 18 now, but I'm out of that period. But they just kind of accept it more, right? It's just I think here, it's still an issue to think about government helping people to pay for childcare. Even with things like locally talking about pedestrian safety, I grew up with commercials, cross at the green, not in between, and a lot of people are saying that public education campaigns aren't effective according to studies. So I think before, it's great that we're gonna have the chargers, but in places like China, where they have a lot of more people use electric cars, you've gotta reach people and convince them, right, and educate them. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the 2024 postmortem. Joe Biden shouldn't have run again. I mean, you know, you don't have to give me a lot of money to tell you that, but I think it's pretty obvious. And there were pretty normal people that I would talk to. They were a little more conservative than I do, but that scared them. And they were voting for Trump, and, you know, we do have to deliver things. People were saying things to me like, I had more money in my pocket. You know, when Trump was in power, that's kind of what they care more about. So, you know, just going back.
Well, they don't have more money in their pockets now.
Well, now they don't. Now they don't. But I think that was a huge mistake, and leaders in the party, I feel like they need to be able to stand up and say that. And we also can't talk down the working people. I think that's where we went wrong, like 70s and 80s, and that's why Reagan got all the union people and then decimated unions.
Yeah.
You can't make people feel like they're stupid.
The gentleman over here said something really important. I haven't had a chance to riff on it a little bit, but I really do want to. The gentleman over here said, how do we reclaim patriotism on the left?
Yep.
We're friends here, but they're not 100% wrong. I think they're 60% wrong. But we got to start changing our behavior around these areas. Again, if we want that tent to be bigger than it is today. Last one? Okay. Yeah, I got it. Screwed it.
Yeah. Going back to your perspective for 2028, we've seen what can happen negatively when social and cultural issues are in the crosshairs. I don't need to give any examples, I think. But I'd also acknowledge that there are some gains when we look at this particular area. Even in my birth state of Montana, I was being pleasantly surprised by transgender inclusion in the last few weeks. So my question to you is, how are you certain that your thesis is not imbalanced? Where does your argument get you if economics is not what drives enough voters?
Yeah, great question. Always worth asking yourself, am I right about this? I struggle hard with making sure that when I say lean left economically, maybe even more left than I would naturally be comfortable doing, and I think that's the winning formula, and lean right, that I'm not saying, but we're not going to talk about racial justice, justice for any marginalized or disenfranchised population. That is the definition of the Democratic Party. I think more than anything else, it's the order in which we say it. I really do believe that there are people who would have voted for us, but they bought into that last ad that Trump bought, which is that we cared a lot more about who was in whose bathroom than we did about the fact that they couldn't afford food. So I think so long as we open with and focus hard on the affordability, not a word I love, parents don't think about affordability, they think about the fact they can't buy food and their kids can't buy homes. I think if we focus first, second, and third on that, I think we have a lot of room to say this, which is authentic, which is, hey, any transgender American has all the rights that any other American has. They cannot be discriminated against in the workplace, in the civic environment. And you know what? There's some tough marginal issues here. You know, there is no question that somebody who grew up in a biological architecture has certain physical traits that are different than a woman. So there are some tough ones. I don't think sandlot baseball is a tough one, but I do think that Olympic swimming, where whoever wins that race is now a millionaire, whatever. Anyway, you get my point here. You can acknowledge the toughness of those issues where Americans perhaps don't agree with us in a way that isn't off-putting. So long as you start by focusing on the stuff that they feel. I really don't believe that there is a huge population out there who are going to object to our struggles to try to bring, just as we did with gay Americans, to try to bring the transgender community fully into participation in our life. We just need to be. We need them to believe that we hear them and understand them and see them and feel their struggles. And so it's almost the order in which these things are said, in my opinion. But like I said, it's always worth asking, are you sure you're right about that?